Midnight pressed on Terry's house like a damp hand, and the drywall sighed as if it learned to breathe. A crack unzipped above the mantel, thin as a paper cut, then wider, then wrong. Terry said, "That wasn't the wind," and the bulbs fluttered like startled eyes. Plaster dust salted his hair, and the air tasted of wet copper and attic rot. He stepped closer, hearing a hush move inside the studs, a hush with weight, a hush with teeth. The fissure bent into a hooked curve, then another, forming a symbol he did not recognize, and somehow already feared. His phone camera shook as he lifted it, and the lens caught a pulse inside the gypsum like a throat. "Don't," Terry said to no one he named, and the house answered with a low, damp scrape. The floorboards flexed as if a swimmer turned beneath them. From the kitchen doorway, darkness looked thicker than night, as though it pooled. He felt the room lean toward the mark, hungry and patient. He whispered Lena's name, and the crack twitched, eager, listening. Something on the other side stroked the wall, and the paint blistered like skin. Dawn bleached the living room into a tired gray, and the symbol looked older, as if the night gave it years. Terry said, "It moved," though there was no witness, and the word felt stolen from his throat. He set coffee beside a stack of overdue bills, and watched the wall like it might blink. The rain had sunk into the studs, and the house smelled like basements and something buried. He touched the groove with a pencil eraser and felt a throb, steady, patient, and wrong. He searched for plaster dust on the floor, and found a faint ring, as if something pressed its face to the wall and kissed it. The lamp leaned a degree out of true, and the cord trembled with no draft. He told himself he was overtired, and the symbol curved more, an answer he did not want. He opened a window for air, and the outside felt thinner than in here. He closed it, and the hush returned, holding him where he stood. He tried to map the lines with tape, building a grid to prove the wall was plain. The tape buckled where the groove passed, as though the space refused measurement. Terry said, "You are in there," and hated that it felt like courtesy. The refrigerator cycled and stuttered, then hushed mid-hum, as if listening. He pressed his ear to the paint and heard a slow drag like claws combing old paper. A draft crept along the baseboard and brought the cold scent of lilies he had not bought. He straightened, jaw clenched, and wrote the shape on a notepad, but the copy looked clumsy, like a child's. The original line flexed within the wall, and the copy on the page seemed to look back. He tore the page free and set it face down. Then stillness folded over the room like a heavy blanket. A knock came, too soft to travel far, and the door opened onto empty air and wet steps. Terry said, "Hello, Nate," naming who should have stood there, yet no one answered. The porch smelled like rain and old wood, and the street beyond seemed a photograph. He felt the pull of the living room behind him, as if the house leaned him back by the ribs. He left the door ajar and returned to the mark, and the door drifted shut without a draft. The latch settled with a click that sounded satisfied. He whispered, "Stay out," and heard a second click from inside the wall, a mocking echo. He stood between both sounds, a hinge where the house could turn. The symbol gleamed with a damp sheen, and he wiped his palm on his jeans, finding grit that was not dust, but something finer, like ground shell. He filmed the wall again, steady hands, slow pan, careful breath. On the phone screen, a frame appeared that should not exist, an iris opening where paint should be dull. Terry said, "No," and scrolled back, finding only normal plaster, then the eye again, then nothing. The room's corners darkened as if light forgot them. He listened and heard a syllable formed by wood and air, his name shaped without a mouth. He set the phone down, and the device vibrated, though no call came, crawling across the table like it wished to flee. He picked it up, and the camera showed an instant of rippling paint that moved like a cheek under cold water. He lowered the phone, and the wall was quiet, blank as a liar's smile. He whispered, "I hear you," and the silence thickened until it felt like fingers at his throat. Morning light fell through dusty blinds, pale and weak, settling on stacks of unopened envelopes. Terry sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from a sleepless night. He muttered, "I can fix this," though the words rang false. The unpaid bills blurred beneath his hand, but he pressed them flat as if control lay in paper. He hid a small box beneath the sink, its wood worn smooth, its weight unbearable. Inside were letters he could not read, voices he could not face. The walls groaned with quiet satisfaction, as though they knew his secrets. He poured water into the coffee pot, and the sound echoed too long, a murmur behind the hiss. The window rattled, though the air was still, and the smell of damp earth bled in. He told himself the house was failing, not him, but the thought landed thin. The kitchen clock ticked slow, a lag in its rhythm, as if marking time for something else entirely. The phone vibrated across the counter, startling Terry from his silence. A voicemail blinked, Evelyn Shaw's voice crisp, urgent, warning of patterns she once told him never to repeat. He let it play, then deleted it with a single swipe. The kitchen fell back into its hush as though relieved. He said, "Not now," though no one had asked. The crack in the wall pulsed faintly, a reminder he chose not to see. He shoved the phone into a drawer, the slam too loud, reverberating like laughter. Coffee steamed in his cup, but the scent carried a bitter note, metallic and strange. He stared at the door as if expecting someone, though he had already chosen silence. The unanswered message weighed heavier than the stack of bills, pressing against his chest. He closed his eyes, and in the dark, he saw the mark glowing like an ember. The photo frame toppled from the mantel, shattering glass across the floor. Terry bent to lift it, his hand shaking. Lena Hart's face stared from the picture, soft smile frozen, years untouched. He whispered her name, and the wall behind the frame quivered, its surface flexing as though hearing. A pang of guilt struck deeper than the jagged glass at his knees. He set the photo upright, the crack running through the image like a scar. The living room seemed to lean inward, every angle pulling him back toward the mark. The air grew dense, humid, and smelled faintly of lilies long decayed. He pressed his palm against the wall, willing it to be still, but it throbbed once beneath his skin, a heartbeat not his own. He pulled back quickly, wiping plaster dust on his jeans. The photo rattled again, though no draft moved. He sat alone in the dimming room, talking aloud as if the silence might answer. "I remember that night," Terry said, though he had never told it to anyone. His voice broke and echoed back, thinner, not his. He confessed half-truths, secrets lodged in him like splinters, hoping release might steady the walls. The house creaked above, deliberate, measured, like a reply. His chest tightened with the weight of things unsaid. The shadows deepened across the carpet, pooling in corners, inching closer. He rubbed his temples, sweat clinging despite the chill. The wall's crack seemed to lengthen with each word he spoke, eager for confession. He stopped, throat raw, unable to continue. The silence that followed felt aware, thick and watchful. The knock startled him from the spiral, sharp against the quiet. Dr. Mason Cole stepped inside, clipboard under arm, voice brisk. He examined the wall with detached calm, tracing the grooves with a penlight. "Just settling patterns," he said, laughing, though his smile did not reach his eyes. Terry's jaw tightened, fury under fear. Mason spoke of repairs, of beams and foundations, words clinical and sterile. But the wall exhaled a sigh, wet and low, vibrating through the floorboards. Terry flinched, but Mason ignored it, dismissing what he could not understand. "You're letting your mind play tricks," Mason said. Terry whispered, "It's not my mind," though Mason did not listen. The room grew colder, the draft slithering along their ankles like breath. The cracks had grown overnight, weaving into a lattice of jagged lines that wrapped the living room walls. Terry crouched with chalk in hand, marking their positions, his breath shallow. He whispered, "You're moving while I sleep," and the words shivered in the stale air. The chalk lines shifted out of alignment, proving themselves alive. The wall seemed to pulse faintly, a heartbeat embedded in plaster. Terry dragged another mark, but it twisted into a rune he did not intend. His fingers trembled, chalk snapping in two. He stared at the half-symbol, feeling it gaze back. The silence pressed so heavy that he swore he heard his own skull creak. The floor sagged an inch beneath him, as though something passed below. He muttered, "Not real," though sweat slicked his brow. Still, he mapped every line, building a grid no blueprint could explain. Mason returned with his clipboard, calm voice cutting through the unease. "Patterns like this are tricks of the eye," he insisted, leaning close to the marks. Terry snapped, "They're changing overnight." His voice cracked with fear. Mason smirked, dismissing him, but his penlight caught a curve that bent as they watched. Mason blinked and adjusted his glasses, brushing it off with nervous laughter. Terry's hands shook as he pointed, his nails dirty with plaster dust. The silence broke with a low groan inside the wall, a sound of pressure shifting. Mason dismissed it as settling beams, yet his jaw clenched hard. Terry stepped back, whispering, "You saw it," though Mason refused to answer. The house seemed to mock them both with its patient breath. The house hushed, then footsteps began inside the wall, deliberate, pacing in rhythm with Terry's own. He froze, eyes wide, then walked slowly across the room. Each of his steps was mirrored by heavy thuds behind the plaster. He stopped, and the echo stopped too, just inches from his ear. His skin prickled, hair rising on his arms. Mason muttered, "Rats," but his voice quivered. Terry pressed his ear close, hearing breath drawn deep within the wall. He whispered, "Who's there?" And silence fell. A sudden knock from inside made him stumble back, heart thundering. The wall exhaled, damp and warm, brushing his face like a hand. In the kitchen, rust trickled from the faucet, brown threads spreading in the sink. Terry leaned close, the stench metallic, sharp. From the drain, a whisper coiled upward, soft, steady, speaking his name in a voice not his own. He staggered back, knocking over a chair. Mason muttered explanations, pipes corroded, iron buildup, but his words were thin, brittle. Terry stared into the drain, lips trembling, whispering, "How do you know me?" The whisper echoed again, mockingly slow. The sink pulsed with faint vibration, as though something breathed beneath the pipes. The house smelled of old soil and wet stone, suffocating. The basement door stood shut, wood warped with age, but Terry swore it moved with the rhythm of breathing. He approached slowly, each step weighted with dread. A chill draft slid under the door, damp and earthy, carrying the sweet rot of lilies long dead. He reached for the knob, his hand trembling, whispering Lena's name without meaning to. The door shivered once, as though something pressed against it from the other side. Mason said, "It's air pressure," though his face blanched pale. The knob turned a fraction on its own before settling still. Terry stumbled back, chest tight, the silence more dangerous than sound. The air grew heavy, and the wall cracks pulsed in unison with the breath behind the door. Terry hammered boards across the deepest crack, each nail trembling in his grip. The sound echoed unnaturally, as though the house absorbed it. He whispered, "Stay in there," though the wall bowed outward against his work. The nails bent slowly, metal groaning as if pushed from the other side. Sweat dripped from his forehead, stinging his eyes. He drove another nail, but the wood shuddered and warped, rising like breath beneath his hand. His chest tightened with panic. Behind him, the lamp flickered, shadows rippling across the boards like moving water. The boards pulsed once, buckling in rhythm with something alive within. Terry stumbled back, hammer slipping from his fingers. The house settled with a groan, satisfied, as though mocking the attempt to keep it contained. The knock startled him before the door creaked open. Evelyn Shaw stepped in, her coat damp from rain, her eyes tracking the spreading marks. "These aren't protections," she said coldly. "They're invitations." Terry's throat tightened, but he whispered, "You knew." Evelyn brushed the wall with her fingertips, pulling back quickly as if burned. Her expression hardened, jaw set, eyes carrying knowledge she would not yet share. She told him he had drawn these once before, even if he did not remember. The house creaked loudly at her words, floor groaning like a growl. Mason stood stiff at the far side, frowning, trying to explain it away. Terry glanced between them, heart pounding. Evelyn's voice softened into warning. "It's already listening." Terry tried the front door, rattling the knob, but the wood frame swelled shut. His phone compass spun, needles twitching in every direction. Every window he checked opened onto the same narrow alley, though his house faced a street. He said, "It's not possible," his voice breaking. Evelyn muttered a low chant, though her lips trembled. Mason laughed nervously. "It's tricks of your mind," yet sweat rolled down his temple. The air pressed heavy, crushing, as though the house folded inward. The walls stretched, paint rippling like muscle. The door shuddered once, then stilled, locking him inside. The windows dimmed, each view identical, an impossible loop. Terry whispered, "There's no way out," and the silence agreed. The walls shifted again, a shadow drifting inside the plaster like a swimmer beneath milk. Terry froze, whispering, "Do you see it?" Mason scoffed, pointing to wiring diagrams, insisting it was a reflection. But the breaker had already been shut. Evelyn's eyes widened, her breath catching as the shadow curled upward, long fingers dragging across the wall. Mason blinked hard, forcing denial. His clipboard clutched white-knuckled. The shadow pressed against the surface, forming ridges, an outline too large to be human. Terry backed away, the air thick with static, hairs rising along his arms. The house hummed low, a vibration deep enough to rattle glass. Evelyn unfolded an old blueprint, paper yellowed and creased. She pointed to a hidden sigil drawn faintly in the margins. Terry's stomach lurched. He recognized his own handwriting. "You drew these years ago," she said. Mason frowned, squinting at the paper, muttering about coincidence. Terry whispered, "I don't remember." The walls groaned, boards creaking overhead, as if reacting to the admission. Evelyn's voice was sharp, urgent. "You invited it then, and it's still here now." Terry's fingers traced the faded ink, and the lines seemed to shift under his touch, alive. His mind splintered with fragments of memory, half-forgotten nights and chalk dust beneath his nails. The blueprint trembled in his hand as though breathing. Terry dragged the wooden box from beneath the sink, its hinges stiff with rust. Inside lay unopened envelopes, their paper warped with damp. Each was addressed to him in Lena Hart's handwriting, delicate and familiar. His stomach twisted. He whispered, "I never saw these," though the ink proved otherwise. The walls vibrated softly, as if laughing at his denial. He lifted one envelope, fingertips trembling, the smell of mildew thick. The return address was his own house. A chill coiled up his spine, breath catching. He set the letters on the table, heart hammering. Evelyn watched silently, her eyes sharp with knowing. Mason muttered something about old mail, but his voice cracked. Terry's hand hovered above the stack, unable to tear one open. The silence deepened, suffocating, and the walls swelled as if eager to hear his choice. He tore one envelope open at last, hands shaking. The letter inside described a ritual to hold what breaks through. His vision blurred as the words burned into him. The symbols covering his walls matched those on the page, strokes he had drawn before. He muttered, "This is my writing," voice hollow. Evelyn's expression hardened, confirming what she had known all along. Mason snatched the paper, scanning it, his face pale though he tried to laugh. The walls groaned deeply, acknowledging the recognition. Terry clutched his head, memories pressing in. Chalk dust, midnight whispers, symbols written by his own hand. The truth clawed at him. He had not been the victim, but the keeper of something hungry. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "I taught you those symbols after Lena vanished. You begged me to help you contain it." Terry shook his head violently, whispering, "No, I don't remember." Evelyn's eyes filled with something close to pity, but also warning. The house creaked, responding like a listening beast. Mason scoffed. Contain what? This is superstition, though he stepped back unconsciously. Terry's pulse roared in his ears as fragments of forgotten nights bled into memory. His own chalk lines sealing cracks, whispered names in the dark. Lena's voice fading. He whispered, I brought this, voice trembling. Evelyn replied sharply, You invited it. The boards above groaned, as though agreeing. Mason moved toward the basement, insisting on proof. He pried open a hidden crawl space, dust choking the air. Inside lay a chalk circle, scuffed as if clawed from within. Terry's throat closed at the sight. The markings were his own, the lines familiar, but broken. Mason's penlight trembled as it swept across scratches gouged deep in the wood. Animals, he muttered, though his voice failed. Evelyn's whisper cut through. This was never an animal. Terry staggered back, pressing his hand to the wall. The surface throbbed beneath his palm, warm and alive. The shadows in the crawlspace writhed, moving though no breeze touched them. The realization crushed him. This was no intrusion, but a prison he had built. The blueprint, the letters, the clawed circle, all collided into clarity. Terry's knees buckled, and he whispered, I caged it here. The room vibrated with approval, walls swelling like lungs inhaling. Evelyn's voice cut sharp. The cage is failing. Mason muttered denials, though his shaking hands betrayed him. Terry saw his own handwriting everywhere, in the runes, in the margins of the blueprint, in the rituals. He had built the prison and forgotten. He was not hunted. He was jailer. The house creaked as if amused by his memory's return. The cracks spread farther, widening, symbols glowing faint. Terry pressed both hands to the wall, tears cutting through dust on his face. He whispered, It's my fault. The wall pulsed once, pleased. Night folded over the house until the windows were panes of ink. The walls bowed as if lungs swelled inside the studs. A seam split above the mantel, slick with cold breath from nowhere. Terry said, It's waking, and the lamp dimmed to a sick ember. The floor pitched subtly, a ship in black water, groaning with each heartbeat not his. Evelyn traced a circle of chalk on the rug, lips tight, movements precise and hurried. Mason pretended calm and failed, clipboard tapping an impatient stutter. The plaster stretched into joints that bent wrong, like elbows where no arms should be. Nails squealed as boards bulged outward, metal screaming in thin crescents. Cold spread across the room in waves, frosting Terry's exhale to white. He whispered, Lena's name, and the wall shivered all the way to the ceiling. The seam widened, patient, delighted, and sure. Evelyn set a bowl of salt and ash in the chalk ring, voice dropping into a rhythm that seemed older than the house. She guided Terry's shaking hands to complete a containment line over the worst seam. He said, Tell me when to stop, but the line did not want to end. Mason filmed with his phone, declaring he would debunk it, though his knuckles blanched on the case. The wall knocked once, twice, a measured code that mocked them with patience. The symbols on the blueprint breathed, their ink bruising darker with each chant. Wind pressed the windows flat, yet no branches moved outside. Evelyn's cadence deepened, syllables tasting like iron in the air. The lamp flared, then guttered, shadows curving toward the ring. Terry held the chalk hard enough to snap it and kept tracing. The seam twitched and waited for its turn. The wall parted like damp parchment, and a limb pressed through, pale as mortar and jointed like a centipede's prayer. The temperature plunged until breath became smoke. Terry felt the chalk ring tug at him like gravity. Mason whispered, "Costume rig," and took one step closer that he regretted. The limb flexed, nails black and long as roofing tacks, tapping the molding in a rhythm that matched Terry's heart. Evelyn shouted a word that tasted of sparks, and lifted the bowl high. The ash swirled as if magnetized toward the breach. The limb recoiled and struck the boards with a hollow thud that rattled dishes in the sink. Plaster snowed across the rug in slow spirals. Terry said, back, and found he had not moved at all. The house uttered a wet sigh, pleased by their fear. Evelyn thrust Terry into the chalk ring and stepped beside him, shoulders touching, voice steady. She guided his hand through the final sigil, a knot of lines that closed like a trap. He said, "It knows me," and the wall answered with a long, hungry creak. The limb angled toward them, seeking a seam in the circle. Mason backed to the doorway, recording, whispering apologies to the future. The air thundered inside their chests, a low frequency that blurred thought. The final stroke met the first, sealing with a cold spark that tasted like snow. The limb snapped back, leaving gouges that bled gray pulp. Evelyn's chanting softened to a thread. Terry felt the house tilt its ear to listen. Silence pressed until the bones in his face ached. The ring held. For now, it held. Light without warmth seeped from the sigil, a pale corona that pushed the dark to the corners. The wall closed grudgingly, like teeth relaxing after a bite. A sliver of the thing stayed, a listening ridge just beneath the paint. Terry said, "It's not gone," and the ridge quivered in assent. Evelyn lowered the bowl, arms shaking now that the moment had passed. Mason ended the recording and stared at nothing, lips moving with rehearsed denials. The house exhaled a final time, and the lamp steadied to a timid glow. Cracks webbed the ceiling like frost, but the chalk ring remained unbroken. Terry's heartbeat slowed to something human again. Outside, the rain stopped with a unified hush. Inside, a new tick began behind the baseboard, soft as a watch under skin. Dawn sifted into the living room and flattened the night into gray. The boards lay still at last, as if they had never breathed. The chalk ring held like frost that refused the sun. Terry said, "It's quieter," and did not believe it. He gathered the scattered letters and set them aside without opening one. The house seemed to watch his hands and weigh his choice. Coffee steamed and went cold untouched. He wiped plaster from the table and found more under his nails. The ridge beneath the paint did not move, yet he felt it lean toward him. He whispered, "We done," and the room answered with nothing at all. The nothing felt deliberate, and it kept him from looking at the box. Mason reviewed the footage on his phone, lips thin, posture rigid. "There's an explanation," Mason said, and the sentence tried to stand straight. Terry watched the screen flicker over a frame he wished to forget. Mason pocketed the clip like contraband he would never show. In the window glass, his reflection lagged a heartbeat behind his movements. He did not turn to see it, though his shoulders tightened. "Optical delay," Mason said, and his voice tripped on the lie. The house gave a tiny click that felt like a swallowed laugh. Terry folded his arms and let the silence answer him. No one thanked anyone, and that felt correct. Evelyn packed her notes with careful hands, then looked up and fixed Terry in place. "Cages require caretakers," Evelyn said, and the room accepted the job. Terry nodded like a pen signing a debt. Fresh paint covered a seam, but the brush left a tremor in the stroke. The ticking behind the baseboard counted new time that was not on any clock. "You'll hear it before you see it," Evelyn said, and her voice softened on the warning. She set a piece of chalk on the mantel, the way someone leaves a candle. The air cooled as if a door had opened in a far room. Terry said, "I'll keep watch," and believed it just enough to stand still. When Evelyn stepped to the porch, the house drew a breath and let it go. Terry turned back to the table and found a new envelope waiting where there had been none. The paper felt warm, as if it had been in a pocket. He said, "No one came in," and the words landed without sound. Inside lay a single symbol, clean and exact, not in his hand. The ink gleamed like oil on water, shifting shape if he dared to blink. The room leaned closer, the way a listener tilts an ear. "Who sent this?" Terry said, and the question did not want an answer. The tick behind the baseboard skipped once, then settled. Evening pooled in the corners and climbed the walls like slow tide. Terry made one last walk through the rooms and touched each switch with care. "That's enough," Terry said, and the house held its breath. The final lamp went dark, and the window gave back only his outline. From the living room, the ridge inhaled and shaped his breath into his own exhale. The sound returned to him soft and exact. "Welcome home," the wall said, and used his voice to say it. Terry did not turn because turning would make it ordinary. The dark arranged itself around him and waited.